Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Amy Warren. Amy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a guest with you who can't be seen on the camera, but who is within earshot, and that is your son, correct?
Yes.
And his name is, coincidentally,
Asher.
How do you like that?
Warren.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Asher, you can tell people this is your podcast, and you would be able to fool them. All right. Well, thanks for being here, despite your busy life, because we're going to talk about how you have a multifaceted marketing career. But we're going to start at the beginning, whatever that means for you. So what I'd like you to tell me is, when did you start thinking about careers, and where did you go from there? And did that lead you to where you are today, or did you have to make some turns along the way? So start wherever you want.
Yeah. I would say I was not one of those people who just knew I always want to be a veterinarian or just knew. So it just was kind of a thing where my father was an entrepreneur, small business owner. And so when I was younger, we would travel together and we got certified for scuba diving. And that really stuck with me, kind of opened this whole world. So as we traveled, I couldn't understand the people. They were speaking Spanish, and it's like, what are they saying? So that kind of influenced me in school. I wanted to take another language. So kind of fast forward to when I was in college, and, advisors saying, well, you're a sophomore, you need to pick something.
Yeah. And where'd you go to school?
I went to DePauw University in Greencastle.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I got to pick something. I'm doing okay in Spanish. I guess Spanish it is.
Okay.
And so
All right. Okay.
graduate with a liberal arts degree. And right at about a couple of months before I was going to graduate, I just had like this panic. And so I called my dad and I was like, I have a major problem. And he's thinking, is she flunking out of school, or what's the problem? And I tell him, no, like, I'm going to graduate and I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do.
And when you're in that position, you think you're the only person experiencing it. And it's actually more common than not among college students that you get to the finish line and you don't know what's
now
next.
What?
Yeah.
And you also, for me, because it was liberal arts, I didn't really feel qualified in any particular skill set.
Yeah.
So
as an English major, I can empathize. Yes.
Yeah, it could apply broadly, but
sure.
where does your next concrete step go? And so my dad was like, just try to take something that you like and put it with something you're good at. And I'm like, okay, Dad, I like to scuba dive and I'm kind of good at Spanish, but not really.
Sure.
And I like to drink rum. What can I do with that? Let's make a career out of that. And he's going, wow, that might not look that great on the resume. So let's come up with a better
might not want to lead with that.
Story.
Yeah.
And so his suggestion was, well, why don't you look at some of the Spanish-speaking countries out there that maybe don't have a guidebook about the diving? You could write about it and dive and learn just in more Spanish. So I thought that's great. Well, name some Spanish-speaking countries out there. So he's picturing in his mind there's Florida, and below that there's Cuba. And I just stopped him right there. Like, it just sounded like so mysterious and like a big challenge.
Yeah.
And
so what was
what I want to do.
What was the state of U.S.-Cuba relations at the time you had that revelation?
That was like in 98. So like it was still very restricted. And so my dad, not wanting to shoot down my idea, was like, well, all right, I'll support that if you find a legal way in. And he's thinking, there's no way she's going to get in.
Yeah.
And I spent the next month researching everything at the library. Yeah. And I found this young socialist philosopher of America type trip out of University of Iowa. It was legit and whatnot. So I signed up for it and I told my dad and I said, the deadline's, in 2 days if you want to go. And he's thinking, he almost ran over his neighbor on the way to the post office. Like, I'm not letting her go by herself.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a letter in English and Spanish of the idea of the book, thinking, I don't know who I'll meet, but along the way, I'll just try to tell them what this project is. And one of the people leading the trip didn't really understand what I was saying. And so I said, well, flip it over, the letters in Spanish. And she goes, oh, I know the director for the Center for Marine Research in University of Havana. Would that help? I was like, that would help.
Yeah, that'd help a little bit. Yeah.
And so I met with her. Again, we told her the idea, and she started helping us find different spots around the island. And at that time, you had to be fully hosted.
Okay.
In other words, you're not spending money in
Yeah.
Cuba. So the university, her Center for Marine Research, would host us, and we'd dive around the island
Wow.
on their boat, the research boat.
Yeah.
And that's how I was able to visit these places. And of course, I had a great time with my dad.
Sure.
And made all these memories and
Yeah.
whatnot. But again, didn't know the first thing about publishing a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so wrote the whole book, and then I didn't realize, I should have been looking for publishers
Sure.
first.
Yeah.
So it took a good 5 years
Wow.
to get that thing published.
Wow, that's a pretty hard to top start to a career. So what happens next after that?
Well, it didn't really. So the thing about Cuba is it'll look like it's opening and then it closes back
Yeah.
up, and then it's
Sure.
tightened restrictions. So right about the time that the book was published and whatnot, the restrictions tightened again.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking, how am I going to sell this book? So I went to this trade show. It was an industry trade show. This colleague of my father's, said, you can set up in our corner of our booth. So all I had was this huge map of Cuba, and I just put it up there. And
Yeah.
I had like a blue line rough printout of
Yeah.
the book. It wasn't out yet. And I thought, I'll see if I can sell some advertising
Sure.
on the back of it. And so I made an appointment with this company called PADI, Professional Association of Diving Instructors.
Yep.
They teach the world how to scuba dive. So I met with the vice president of marketing there, and I'm trying to sell them advertising on the back of this book for
Yeah.
Cuba that they can't be in.
Yeah.
They can't
Yeah.
be in Cuba.
Do you want to advertise
But,
to
yeah.
to a customer you can't market to? Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought it was a great idea. So I end up sitting with him for probably over an hour, just talking about the scuba diving industry, the travel industry. Why don't the dive shops do this or that? And he told me, if you're ever interested,
Yeah.
look me up. And so I said, yeah, I'd be interested in a career in, scuba diving and
Yeah.
marketing. And it wasn't even maybe 2 or 3 months later, his team called and said, we've got this opening.
Oh, wow.
And so at the time I was living in Florida, and I
Yep.
moved to California.
Okay.
And that turned out to be the best job where I really learned the fundamentals of marketing.
Wow.
I was there for a number of years, but so I really kind of became an all-around like jack of
Yeah.
all trades. First, I did B2B, then I did
Yeah.
B2C, and then as the digital marketing kind of came on the scene and
Yeah.
social media, it was like we need to have a presence there. So I kind of pitched him on the idea of this new position for e-marketing,
Sure.
online marketing,
Yeah.
and so set up the first Facebook page, the first blog, stuff like that. And it just grew from there. But it was always like I felt like I was maybe just 1 or 2 Google searches from from losing my job,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because there were no classes at
Yeah,
that time.
sure.
So, but I knew myself as a diver. I knew my clients. I knew what they were looking for, and I knew we had a strong brand.
Yeah.
So just kind of learning to take the helm of that presence online. And so then that kind of expanded. So PADI being a global company, they added several positions, one in Asia Pacific and one in the UK similar to mine. So then we had a small team, and we'd get together and figure, okay, you take this time
Yep.
zone, I'll post on that time zone.
Yeah.
And we build a strategy that way.
Okay.
And so I was there good 10 years.
So it
close
sounds
to
like a
10
job you
years.
really loved. Why'd you decide to do something different?
So I ended up, starting a family. We moved back to Fort Wayne because I'm originally from here.
Okay.
And so I worked remotely for a while for them. And then after my second child, he got a little bit older. And as he was getting into kindergarten or so, the rules change again.
Sure.
And this time it was a lot more epic. Like Obama's like, we're going to restore diplomatic
Yeah.
relations. And all the contacts in the industry were reaching out to me saying, how do I do this? I want
Yeah.
to get down there. And so I felt like, okay, now's the time. And my dad had always been, a big fan of Cuba. And he's like, let's figure it out
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So we started kind of spitballing the itineraries, knowing, which areas were good and which were not. But man, that was a whole nother level of complications. And
Oh, yeah.
how do you figure out who to partner with? And
Yeah.
so we we had one close friend in Cuba that we had for a number of years that was kind of like he was able to provide that transient trust, right, to kind of vouch for us. So I ended up going to this convention down there for business. And there were some other Americans down there too, because we were like, how do we get in here?
Yeah.
How do we do this? And ended up meeting a friend of a friend who said, we're the only company allowed, the only agency in Cuba allowed to work with Americans. Here's the process and whatnot. And so it was just a long, drawn out over a year to get the contract. You had to go to Washington and get everything, all these apostilles figured out. And then I wanted to have another attorney look at it to make sure it fits not only our laws, but their laws. So it was a lot going into it, but it was just like, I kind of like the fly by the seat of your pants
sounds
feeling.
like it. Yeah. Well, and it's, one of the things that makes it attractive is the fact that it could shut down at any time. But one of the things that makes it a huge risk is that it could shut down at any time.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is, and what's the name of this entity that you started at this point?
It's called Cuba Scuba.
And that's still part of your professional life today?
Yes,
All
I'll
right.
probably always keep it just because it's, I feel like it's a calling.
Yeah.
It's definitely a part of who I am. But the book, 20 years ago was named Cuba Scuba, and then the entity or organization, we set it up as Cuba Scuba.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. So you've got that running, in one track on your career, but you do some other stuff along the way too. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I've always tried to hone marketing, and of course, digital marketing, it's always changing.
Yeah.
So I would do different projects here and there, just different people that cross through my life. I'd help build their websites or...
Well, it's really the best way to learn is to do it. I mean, I know that
Yeah.
sounds cliched, but it's true.
I know.
And as someone who teaches classes, I tell the people who take those classes, this is great. This tells you how to get in the door, but now you have to experiment and
Yeah.
make some mistakes and learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is definitely the way you learn. I worked... I did a lot of odd jobs like that in different projects when my kids were little. And then the Cuba Scuba took off way more than I was prepared for. And so it took me away from my family quite a bit. And it was kind of like at the spot where it was either going to have to scale up more or I was going to have to scale back. And it was right around that time that the diplomacy things changed. Things got tighter on the restrictions. And then the pandemic hit. So it kind of like all took care of itself in that term.
Sure. And was it just you and your dad? Were there any other employees, or was it just the two of you?
I had several employees, team members in Cuba, and then I had a couple of tour guides that I worked with. So it was maybe a team of 5.
Okay.
And when the pandemic hit, I was so worried for our team in Cuba because, they had it way harder than us to try to figure out what they were doing. So we were in contact almost every day.
Wow.
And the cool thing is so many of our clients were sending help and contacting, like, how can we help them and sending things down there. So I'd say that the biggest mission of the entity has always been to give this transformational experience.
Yeah.
But that when a client comes home, like, their view has changed of Cuba and that they now become an ambassador for those Cuban people.
Yeah.
Because, we all watch the news. How much stock can we put in this article or that article?
Yeah. Well, and it's really, it's the one thing that I've found is people who I know who have traveled extensively tend to be the most accepting of people who aren't like them, and people who haven't traveled extensively tend to be the least accepting of people like them.
And I also think,
people unlike them, I should say.
We each have our network of people that we know. You're not going to argue with someone's personal experience. You might argue with an article you read or whatever.
Yeah.
But so that's really our goal. A lot of people who have come on the trips were the first time. They were anxious and nervous. Their parents were like, you're going to die down there. Like, don't go. So it's really rewarding when they come home to share that experience and show how different it is.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's funny because some people had the perception that it was dangerous, and my very, very, very limited experience in Havana was like, this is one of the safest cities I feel like I've ever been in. Yeah. There was really nothing. There are U.S. cities I've been in and I felt a little bit more at risk. Yeah.
Yeah. I went down there plenty of times just myself.
Yeah.
my youngest was 2 years old when I took him down.
Yeah.
But I think that those personal experiences, then those clients then turned into strong advocates, right? So when the pandemic hit, they were thinking about
Yeah.
the people they'd met down
Yeah,
there. And
that's
they
great.
were like, we're ready to go back when
Yeah.
we can. So that's kind of been the ebb and flow. Well, during the pandemic, obviously there's no travel, there's nothing. So in order to support myself, I was doing several different
Yeah, sure.
jobs.
Sure.
But when you start your own business, like I knew marketing and I knew the product, but I didn't really know accounting very
Yeah.
well. I didn't.
Yeah.
And there's things that you just have to do because you have to do them. And so you gain these skills as you go along. So when you have to pivot,
Yeah.
you this time you've got more options to pivot
Yeah.
towards.
Sure.
So, I actually ended up working for a nursing home chain here doing marketing
Yep.
locally. And then from there, I ended up doing e-commerce for about 6 months. And then from there, I'm now at Revival Animal Health, which is a pet supply, and it's all e-commerce that we do.
Okay, so I only know this because you mentioned it before we hit record.
Yeah.
It's an Iowa-based company.
Yeah.
How did they find you, or how did you find them?
So a recruiter contacted me, and really it was because of the marketing skills that I had sort of hodgepodge
Yeah.
together
Sure,
going
sure.
along in my life.
Yeah.
That it was a completely different industry, but
Yeah.
yet the skills and approach and your
Yeah.
business acumen applied really well. And I was looking, for me, it's really important the team that I'm with, the customers that we serve, but the team too.
Yeah.
And I just felt like they've had a really great culture
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
way. They take care of their team.
Well, I think ultimately that's what makes a job either fulfilling or not is the people you work with.
Yeah.
And that sounds obvious, but I know a lot of people who are like, I love this industry, and then they get in a job and they don't like the job. It's
Yeah.
because of the people who they're surrounded with. Yeah.
Yeah, a slight tangent, but it just really hit me. So my father, as I said, he was a small business owner. Some people might know it in Fort Wayne. It was Lehman Electronics. So when he was sick, and he was maybe a week or two before he was going to pass away, we decided to have a cookout for him. And I called one of his friends who used to work for him. And he said, well, I'm not just going to write a letter. Like, I want to come. He gets in contact with all the other
Wow.
old employees from 30 years ago.
Wow.
They all dropped what they were doing. They all flew in
Wow.
to
Wow.
come basically say goodbye.
Yeah.
And they were holding up old ads
Oh, wow.
of things that they were telling all these war stories. But it hit me in that moment that Lehman Electronics doesn't exist anymore. Selling the stereos, that
Yeah.
wasn't the thing. The thing was who these people were becoming because
Yeah.
they were under his stewardship.
Yeah.
And that's really the impact
Oh, yeah.
or the legacy. So I totally agree. It's about
Yeah.
the team and it's about the people you touch.
Yeah.
Those clients. I may never see anyone again that went on a trip with me.
Yeah.
But I know that I made an impact, and vice versa for those Cubans that we were able to introduce.
Yeah. Well, and when you're traveling, I just got back from a trip, so this is fresh in my head, but when you're traveling, you're kind of dependent upon the people who know their way around.
For sure.
And, I tend to get in my own head a little bit, but there's a lot of anxiety that comes with
Yeah.
it. And if somebody can help you persevere through that and actually thrive in that environment, it's kind of this bond that you really can't replicate in other ways that
Yeah.
quickly. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Revival. You mentioned tell me again,
Pet supply.
Pet supply. Okay.
Health supplies.
All
for
right.
pets.
So when was it founded, and how does the brand present itself? How does it differentiate
Yeah,
itself?
so it was founded 30 years ago
Okay.
by a veterinarian.
Okay.
And it's really it's got a really great niche,
Mm-hmm.
pet care at scale. So not necessarily, I own a dog, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily be their client.
Yeah.
It's really shelters, breeders, you have more of a flock of
Okay. Yeah.
a pack
Yeah.
of dogs or cats
Yeah.
or whatever. Yet it's not obviously as clinical as your
Sure.
veterinarian. So, some people are comfortable giving vaccines to
Mm-hmm.
their pets. They want to have healthy
Mm-hmm.
puppies and kittens to, provide a good life for
Yeah.
the other families. So they give them, supplements and things like that. So that's really kind of the niche. But I would say the coolest thing is the education sets them apart.
Okay.
So like you can call in and most all of the people on the phone are like not like a certified vet tech, but very, very well
Okay.
knowledgeable. They're trained by an industry veterinarian. So you can really get your questions answered while you're saying, okay, do I need this? Do I need that? And obviously they have a whole online e-commerce piece, which during the pandemic was like, it grew a lot.
Well, and the pet ownership went up considerably. My understanding is during the pandemic. Yeah.
It definitely went up a lot. And then now, as people are adjusting, people are in the office or they're traveling again, shelters are filling back up. And so they need that support too. So
Yeah. So what you're doing e-commerce for this business, what kind of team are you working with there?
Okay, so I love the team. There's about 18 on the marketing team. And it's interestingly divided. I think of digital marketing, but I'm actually what is called e-commerce. So we're like a subset of the marketing team. So we've got a developer, a custom solutions person, and then an email and SMS strategist that are on my part of the team. But we all roll into the marketing team for, they've got national brands. And then a big part of their business is they've got proprietary brands as well that they serve to the customer.
All right. So is now most of your time spent still learning, or do you feel like you are now fully productive and you're beyond the learning curve?
Oh, I'm definitely learning.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. But what I love about it is so it's a strong team, but then we also, hire agencies like yourself.
Yep.
And I learn so much from that relationship because I feel like I'm a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
But master of none.
Yeah.
So we need agencies like yours
that,
an expert in PPC, an expert in these things. And just by having the conversations, I glean like every single day just from that portion of my job, which is exciting. I feel like you want to learn and grow wherever you are. Yeah,
and it's one of my favorite things about working here is I'm one of the few non-specialists. Everyone else is really great at a very specific thing, and just kind of absorbing some of that makes me a little smarter in each of those areas, although I'll never touch where they are. But I see that for sure. All right, so let's pivot to the speed round of the show, and it doesn't have to be a speed round. It can go as long as you want it to go. But I want to talk about a few things we've touched on, but in a more specific way. So my first question has to do with career fulfillment, career success. You've alluded to a lot of different things, but what's your one best piece of advice when it comes to setting yourself up for a successful career?
I think the first thing is listening to that little inkling, the passion. I feel like that gives you the direction. It's sort of like the little beacon homing device.
Yeah.
But then I would say try to find other people who are smarter than you to glean from and put yourself in their path.
Okay.
That would definitely be, I would say that's how I end up pivoting and just not being afraid to go have these conversations because you may have something for that person or vice versa, or they might just say, I know somebody you should talk to.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I feel like a career is just a series of pivots, but you kind of know the general direction. And actually, this past week on our marketing team, someone shared this quote about leadership isn't about where your company's going. It's about who your company is becoming. And I feel that. And I also feel that on a personal level, too. So, like, your career direction is your passion, who you're becoming along the way. Right? And who you're passing that on to is really the whole point.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's talk about, you have multiple organizations you work for and with, but if you wanted to amplify something that you think is underappreciated, or you wanted to clear up a myth or misconception about any of the entities you work with, what would that one thing be? Could be something about Cuba. It could be something about your role as a small business owner. It could be related to the pet world. Anything you want.
Yeah. I I guess, I mean, Cuba is just, it's the land of myths
Yeah.
and misconceptions. So I think I would say that, and as an American, you think they don't like us or communism is bad or whatever. But if you take the politics out of it, typically it's, we're not our government. I'm not my government. You're not your government. And there's a lot of things we can appreciate from one another. So I guess I would just say, yeah, that would probably be the biggest myth.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an important
Being
one.
afraid to overcome that. So I think in business, you have to qualify your customers. And so I always worked hard, like with my dive shops and things of, this is not for everyone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's all inclusives and whatnot that you could go to, but I think here is a certain level of adventure and being able to go with the flow.
Yeah.
In our Cuba, they always say "Siempre hay una solución." There's always a solution. So we made that our motto, and we actually started prepping people with the mindset before they go that when you see this happen, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
This is the itinerary that's printed.
Yep.
This is not the itinerary that we'll end up with.
Yeah.
It'll be better because the plan B that they pivot for is always better.
Yeah.
I think that's true in our career too. You have a sort of a direction, but plan B is often better.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that because just today on LinkedIn, I posted a rejection letter I received in 1996 for what I thought was the job I wanted.
Yeah.
And the best thing that ever happened to me was not getting that job.
There you go.
It was in print media, which, isn't all that healthy right now.
Right.
And I was talking about all the things that wouldn't have happened if I had taken that job. So,
yeah.
And, and sometimes the biggest challenges make the best memories. And, you're going to go to Cuba and occasionally the lights may go off where you stay. And so stuff's going to happen.
Yeah.
It was funny because I think it's really astute what you said about politics and the perceptions about Cuba. Again, I was there for a very short time, but one of the people I met said, to the U.S., Cuba is Castro, and to us that is such a small fraction of our history.
Right.
And it's about a lot more than that. And that was maybe the biggest eye-opener for me, was learning that to them, that's a blip on the radar screen.
Yeah.
To us, it's kind of synonymous with the country.
Yeah.
And that's not really, fair or right to think it can be caricatured in that way.
Yeah, and I do think, we get so stuck in, it's so easy to trip over politics and find all the ways that we disagree and all these different conflicting views. And it's much more fun to find the humanness in it.
Yeah.
And we have so much more in common than we think. But even like for my kids and things, to take them there's so many wonderful things that that our culture lacks.
Yeah.
That we can appreciate and vice versa. So then you come home and you kind of hodgepodge the different views of the people you've met and who have inspired you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a great experience for your kids too. Yeah. All right, one more. So what is your best, and I'm putting more pressure on it than there really is. It doesn't have to be your best, but what is a tip or trick or tool or hack you use as a marketer that is important in your work that you think deserves to be either amplified or that people should know about? People have said pen and paper. People have said Evernote. So it doesn't have to be profound, but something that you really rely on that you think is underappreciated.
Okay. So I can't stand accounting,
Yeah.
but it's a necessary part of being a small business owner. So an app that really helped me was Zoho.
Okay.
It's for small business, and it's got all kinds of invoicing, accounting, you name it. You can connect so many portions to it. But for me, it was so much of the business in Cuba, you can't use your credit card. So I was constantly keeping track of how much cash on this receipt and that receipt. Well, Zoho, you just take the photo, you categorize what it was, and it's in your app, and it's all done for my accountant.
So is it kind of like, is it like QuickBooks?
Time.
Is that
it's kind of like QuickBooks, and probably a QuickBooks app. I didn't use that because I was just like, it's already connected into everything else I use. But that saved me so much time later on.
Okay. All right.
So.
Well, that I would not have expected from a marketer here about
No.
accounting software, but that's
there
why
you
we have the
go.
conversation.
And I would say the other tip is think about, like, project yourself down the road. Like, if I go down this path, how will that look for me, and how will that look for, those connected to me? And so I wanted to have fun.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick a field
sure.
that I could have fun.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to bring my kids along.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to do those things. And so there's no reason that your career has to be this part of your life in a box.
Yeah.
And, your personal stuff is over here. Like,
I think that's one of the best things about the last 2 years
too.
is those barriers have really come down.
Yeah.
And we're starting to be, I think, more our authentic selves at work.
Agreed.
And it's not these artificial barriers where you're this person from 9 to 5 and then you
Right.
become a completely different person. I think that's great. It sounds like you were ahead of that curve a
I
little
think
bit.
companies now are more apt in the last 2 years to see us as a whole person.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was like, these are the tasks and this has to be priority.
Yeah.
You have to take off an hour to run the kids here or
Yeah.
there. Like,
Well-
that you're just not dedicated.
Yeah.
Obviously, companies have realized
Yeah.
family first, right?
I hope so. I hope
Well, they
have.
should, yeah.
Well,
And,
and I
yeah.
think it's like, when you see people on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and the cat walks by
Yeah.
the screen, it's kind of hard to avoid that, the facade is over. People have
Right.
lives. And, when the kid is screaming in the background,
Uh-huh.
the cat runs across and, the spouse
And
walks
it's
by.
so
Yeah.
relatable.
Yeah.
And I love even like when people get on the screen and you see whatever, they decorated
Yeah.
their walls
Yeah.
with a trip they were on or whatever. You already immediately get a sense of that person's personality.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
like it.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Thanks, Amy. I
Yeah,
really
thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me on. It
Thanks
was
for
fun.
joining me. And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.